Hi there. So I've played out the first turn of the game, and already it's proven very interesting, particularly in respect to the combat system. Essentially, what's happened is you see this area was full of the old guard, young guard, Moreau, the cavalry, and Napoleon. I've moved Napoleon over to a hill over here, so I'm a bit ginger about putting my leaders into combat yet, because certain results, and I did have one of them last turn, would result in a leader loss check. There was no leader there, so we didn't have to worry about that. But that's something to consider. Essentially, what's happened, the French have moved old guard down here, so to try and secure this area. The young guards have split. Some moved up here, but the majority of them moved down here, and they've moved into this section. So you can see we've got infantry brigades. Essentially, each unit is like a brigade, or the equivalent. So it's a collection of artillery. We've got two there. We've got the Dutch artillery there, which is travelling with young guard here, and some units are what termed squadrons or battalions. So like, where have we gotten here? This unit is a battalion, so it's infantry battalion instead of the brigade, and they're sort of a bit delicate. They tend to be flipped when they retreat. Here's one that was flipped, and you can see it's now has a combat factor of 0. The middle number in the black circle is the morale, which you roll a d6 against to try to get equal to or under in certain occasions. And there are some cavalry squadrons too. So anyway, so there's the old guard moving into position, and you can see they've sent some cavalry. Now you can see that in one turn, that old guard cavalry was about here. They can move a long way, and these fellows who are sort of strung out on this road, they've moved a long way, and it does immediately address something which was quickly addressed in the errata and clarifications, which is that the French can plug all the reinforcement entry points in the first 1 or 2 turns, and according to the original rules, that would make it impossible for the Allies to ever enter the map. Game over. So I'm not worried about that. I'm thinking that they're sort of creating a cordon. The revised rules say if you plug that entry point, then they can spend a movement point to move on somewhere else. Here, the French could anyway sort of plug. I think they've got enough. They could plug that whole line there, which would mean that either these units would never get on, or else you'd have to consider that they have turns off map and come on at a different entry point, and there's no rules for that, only for these 2 off-map boxes. So there's a little bit of a sort of goodwill needed there to let things happen, so as to have a game to play. So you can see I've essentially set up a defensive line along the river there. It's a bit awkward because it's attackers are halved attacking into, but similarly defenders will be halved attacking out of. So, and the interesting thing about this combat system is that attacks are triggered. So, for example, over here, this fellow, if this is the combat phase now, this fellow has to attack both of these units because they are adjacent to him, because they are triggered to be attacked. Now, the artillery here could attack this one instead and provide that kind of soak-off attack, provided that they get a result. If the artillery gets no result on its attack, then the defender will gain a fortune of war, and they can do things like cause a morale check for disruption, or possibly move an enemy unit, possibly move one of their own units, perform an immediate attack, even though we're in the other turn's combat, the other side's combat phase. So interesting things like that can happen. So if these fellows, if the Russians come on and they sort of don't attack, or they manage to leave some fellows adjacent to these guys are going to have to attack or withdraw via disengage, and that's another thing. So essentially what happened over here is that I think, yes, all along this line the Russians and Prussians were a bit further forward, and I went straight to the choice of tactics section. So the French are attacking, they can choose to do a regular attack, we know how that works, or a skirmish, press forward, they could charge, and the attacker or the defender can choose it as a disengage. So if you're in a sort of a forced triggered to attack someone and don't fancy your chances, you can always choose as the attacker to disengage. There's also a last stand. So you can see the defending artillery, infantry and artillery, they add 3, but if the attacker does not retreat, the defender loses a step in addition to. So you see there's gains and benefits for things like press forward, charge, last stand, and that. Disengage is very interesting because disengage essentially, if we look at the combat results table, I quickly annotated it, essentially all those green markings mean that if you roll that result, it's converted into if the attacker rolls within this range and as a defender you chose disengage, all those results are converted to defender retreat. And there's lots of defender retreat results anyway. So you can see that if you choose disengage, let's take a line about here. These are the only results which are going to attack, which are going to affect you. These will be things like a defender lose a step, defender have a morale check or retreat. So essentially, on a disengage, chances are you're going to be retreating as the defender. And similarly, if you choose to disengage for the attacker, on these results, you're going to be retreating. Also, you can see if you're on a -2, you're going to be retreating most of the time. Here, you will take a step loss, so you could take some step losses. And you see down here, the defender's going to take a fortune of war anyway. So basically what that means is that if, as either side, you choose disengage, pretty much you're going to be retreating. And normally when you retreat, battalions and squadrons and artillery are flipped. But if you choose disengage, you don't have to. So it's very useful as a kind of response to attackers moving in. If you consider it, I go, you go, an attacker can sort of move all the way up and pin you force you into combat. This allows some simulation of the other side being able to redress its lines by disengaging as and where as fit. So essentially that's what happened. And then as a result of that, what it meant was that some of these were able to skirmish. Skirmishing happens exactly 2 hexes away. Although it's not stated in the rules whether you can skirmish over, say if I had another battalion there, could this brigade skirmish against there? It's not determined in the rules whether you have that sort of line of sight over your own troops. I decided no, that wouldn't be right. So, but he could skirmish him. What that meant is that your movement rating is used as a combat factor. So that was a 3 versus a 3, and the skirmish result converts a lot of results into no effect or defender retreat. So again, that's another effective way to sort of, instead of those previous soak-off attacks, you sort of might have to sacrifice a unit just to satisfy the result that you have to attack. You can do a skirmish and it could just force the attacker back. So that meant that this fellow didn't have to attack him even though he was being triggered, because this satisfied the attack. And I was also quite surprised that although generally the Allied units are weaker, so for example the French infantry brigades have 6 and 4 combat strength, and the Allied are tending to have, that one was flipped, 3 or even 2 for the Russian ones. They did have some local successes down here. They caused a retreat, and up here they caused a retreat, whereby they were able to use artillery units to bombard over, and with the and then skirmishing in other areas meant that so for example if you're fortunate in the sort of sequence of your attacks, you could, for example, have these fellows skirmish here, and then he might have to retreat as a result of the skirmish, and then this could bombard here. And so, for example, you could do something clever like, say if this fellow's here, he's triggered so he has to attack, and these ones are triggered so he has to be attacked. If he successfully no, so let's say it's like this. So he has to be attacked and he has to be attacked. Well, if he skirmishes against him and it successfully causes him to retreat, then he can add the bombard to this one and satisfy perhaps a better chance of attack against that stack there. So it's very interesting. Where were they? I think he was there, was he? That's near enough. I think it was that. So it's very interesting, yeah, and that they actually caused some retreats. And it wasn't, and here, Moreau decided to disengage. So it's not always that you're causing retreats by your combat, but the threat of your combat makes your opponent decide to choose a disengage type combat, and so will sort of voluntarily retreat his units. So it's very interesting, the combat system with that. It makes it a little bit more involved, but a lot more interesting in the choices that you have and the kind of decisions you can make. It makes it more sort of a tactical feel to otherwise what would be a kind of bread and butter, vanilla flavoured grand tactical combat. So the second turn we're going to get some stacks coming in from the Allies. Nothing came in from them this first turn, so that would be interesting to see how things start to pan out.